Good afternoon, everybody. George Williams Sr. here. Hey, I'm gonna make a different kind of video. Excuse me. Drank too much coffee. This video is something I've been really reluctant for quite some time to share. I've shared it with a few people, some of the things on here. And some of the reactions I've gotten have been positive, and some of them, they have looked at me like I was freaking out of my mind. But I really don't care. I'm at an age, and I've lived enough life to where none of that matters to me anymore. And the fact of the matter is, what I'm about to tell you, the people who criticize it weren't there. So for them to tell me it didn't happen, or I didn't experience what I experienced or saw what I saw, they weren't there. So their credibility is pretty much zero. So the topic is Bigfoot. Now, to start off, disclaimer, I have never seen what I can verify as a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot with my own eyes. So I have seen some weird stuff in the woods, but I can't say I've seen something that was a Bigfoot. Hang on a second. So let's start off with the first experience that I had. This was years ago. I was probably about 14 years old. I was living in a place called Manson, California. And they had a ditch line up there called Bull Ditch. And I had walked from the place I was living at, up the ditch line, about a mile, maybe a little over a mile, strolling along the ditch, just out by myself, having a walk. And then something started pacing me. I could hear its footsteps, and it was footsteps, and it did sound like it was on two legs, not four. And if you've ever been around a lot of animals, you would know the difference. And as I walked, it stayed, 20, 30 feet uphill in the timber, just out of sight, maybe even a little farther than that. But when I would stop, it would stop. And then when I'd start, it would start. At the time, I was thinking it was a mountain lion. I was just a 14-year-old kid. And I didn't know what it was. I couldn't see it. And this went on as I was walking. I turned around and went back to where I came from, back towards home, and it followed me back. And I started testing it. I would walk and then suddenly stop, and it would take like an extra step before it stopped. But if I would walk casually and stop, it would match my pace pretty closely. I got maybe about half a mile, quarter mile, maybe about a quarter mile from where I was staying, and I lost it. I just totally flipped out, and I just bolted. I just took off running, and it didn't follow me. That was my first encounter, and at the time, like I said, I thought I was being followed by a mountain lion, because there was lots of mountain lions up there. As years gone by, I've learned differently. The second event that I had, I was logging, I was cutting timber, working for an outfit. I won't say the names of the different outfits that I've worked for. But we were cutting up behind Alder Springs, way back behind the Slapjack on the south side. And I was driving home, and I rounded a big point in the road that cut back. And when it cut back, there was a draw that I was above. And you could see up the draw maybe 200 yards, 300 yards maybe. And I saw something running up the creek bed. and the pace of my truck and where it was going to cross the creek was rapidly approaching. So I was doing maybe 30 miles an hour on a back logging road. But all I could see, what I could describe running through the brush and up the creek bed, was this light brown hair or fur. I assumed it was a bear. I'd seen many bears, and they moved pretty darn fast. This thing crossed the road, and it was on all fours when it crossed the road, but as far as I could tell. And it ran up across the road and up the up bank and continued up the draw. But where I saw it cross the road, it passed by some branches on a tree. So as I pulled up to my truck, when I saw it cross the road, I must have been at a distance of maybe 150 yards, and I could see right down the road. But when I got there to my truck, I stopped and I got out. And the branches that it ran past, I got out, I grabbed my axe, my fallen axe, and I raised my falling axe up over my head, holding it by the end of the handle. And at that time, I probably had maybe a 32-inch handle on my falling axe. And it could just touch those branches that this thing ran past. Not under, but past. Can't tell you what it was. I can tell you it wasn't a bear. I stand at 5'9", and reaching over my head with an axe handle and an axe on top, that's well over 9-10 feet. So that was my second encounter with something that I can't explain. My third encounter, excuse me, I was falling timber. This was 1992 or 93. I was falling timber up out of a place called French Gulch in California. And there was a gold mine, maybe a mile or so down the mountain to the north of us. And we were yarder logging. And I was finishing up the block. And it was kind of a breezy day, gusting, 15 to 20 miles an hour, maybe 30 miles an hour, peak gusts. But I was at the bottom of the yarder unit, and I was jacking timber up the hill into the unit, finishing off the yarder block, picking up the leaf trees. And I was probably on about a 40-inch Doug fir that was, 120, 130 feet tall maybe. And I was busy jacking it up the hill. The wind was blowing. It was getting a little sketchy. But outside the unit, downhill and to the side, was the reprod, where they had harvested it years ago, and the trees they planted and the trees had grown up, and it needed thinning because the trees were so thick you couldn't even see 2 feet into the brush. And the trees were probably 10 to 20 feet tall, staggered, different heights and stuff. But it was pretty consistent. It was a solid wall of ponderosa pine replant there. But as I was jacking this tree up, the wind caught the top and it popped off the stump and came off the jack backwards, and it fell out of the unit into that plantation. When it hit, something screamed. And the only way I can describe this scream, because it wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a scream, but it sounded like, the only way I could describe it is a cross between a chimpanzee and a laughing hyena. Just fast and loud, and I'm not talking just loud, I'm talking loud at a volume and a frequency that it literally vibrated the bones inside my body. It shook me, the sound. This thing bolted downhill through the plantation, and it sounded like a giant elephant just smashing through the timber at breakneck speed. And it crashed its way down the mountain, and I listened to it as it faded off a good almost a mile, if not a mile, down into the canyon down and away from French Gulch. I never saw it. Don't know what it is. Can't tell you for certainty what it is. I can tell you what it's not. It was not any known creature or wildlife that I've ever seen in the mountains in all the years I've been logging and stomping around in the woods. So that occurrence, I'd always been curious about Bigfoot, but that occurrence right there changed my curiosity to, holy crap, there really is something out here in the woods. What it is, I can't say at that time, but it changed my thinking because this thing was so freaking loud and so strong to have crashed through the brush the way it did. I don't know of any North American animal in California that could have done what it did as fast as it did, as loud as it did, for the distance it covered in a very, very short time. Okay, so after that, what was my next occurrence? I was an adult, had my children. I was living in Manton, of all places, again, and the people I had was living at when I was a child, I was now renting a cabin from, and they were doing some evangelistic work down in town, down in Red Bluff, and they asked me in the evening when I'd come home from work, and it was wintertime, if I would stop by their house and light their fires, because they heated their house with fireplaces, and they had a big house, so they wanted me to at least get their house kind of warmed up before they got home. So I said sure, and so one evening I was coming home. It was after dark. It was a moonless night. I drove up, pulled into their driveway, parked in front of the garage, and of course they didn't give me a key to the front of the house. They gave me a key to the back of the house. So I had to walk around the garage to the back of the house to the back porch. Well, as I got out of the car, they had this Keys hound there. Her name was Smokey. And she came up and greeted me, and everything was cool and stuff. And it was so dark that all you could see was the night sky and the silhouette of the roof and the silhouette of the trees. Everything below that was so dark and pitch black, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I didn't even have a flashlight, but I knew where the sidewalk was because I'd grown up there basically. So I just proceeded with Smokey in tow to walk around the garage to the back porch, and I could hear her footsteps clicking next to me as we walked in the dark. And as I got to the back porch to where I knew I was about to step up on the brick level that's step up to the back door, something roared at me and growled. And it was so loud and so close, I could feel its breath and spit on my face as it roared in my face. And I froze. I couldn't see it in front of me. Everything was pitch black. But I heard Smokey's toenails clicking on the sidewalk as she ran away down the sidewalk. And I just made the comment, I just said, "Smokey," and it roared again. And it was so loud and so close, I mean, it literally had to be in my face because I could feel its breath on my face as it screamed this just vibrating roar that just went straight through your body. If you've ever been at a zoo and you heard the lions roar, and the zookeepers, the animal trainers got the lions to actually roar, it was like that, and it just penetrated your entire body. It just vibrated your hair, your skin, your bones, your teeth. It just rattled you. And thinking at the moment that it was a bear, I just turned around nice and slow, calmly walked down the sidewalk, rounded the corner, and when I got to where I was rounding the next corner to my car, I ran and jumped in my car, fired it up, turned on the headlights, and took off down the hill to my house where my wife was waiting. And wondering what the heck I was looking like because I was probably white as a ghost. So I told her. And then, so that for years I always said, man, I was face to face with a bear. But after all these years, I've realized, and all the bears that I've encountered in the woods, that if I had been that close to a bear roaring at me, and growling at me, I probably wouldn't have a face attached to my skull. He would have probably just slapped my head off. So I'm pretty convinced it wasn't a bear. So anyway, that was that encounter. Then sometime later, years later, my kids were, elementary school age, and my wife and my brother and his wife, we decided to go float down Battle Creek in the middle of the summer when there wasn't even enough water to float. But we decided to go anyways, about 11 miles. And I had a kayak, my wife had an inflatable kayak, my brother and sister-in-law had a Walmart inflatable raft, or two, I don't remember. But anyway, unbeknownst to me, my wife had told her best friend where we left our kids to stay while we were out having our little adventure, to call 911 and send search and rescue if we weren't home that evening. Well, needless to say, on our adventure, my brother's rafts popped on the sharp rocks. My kayak was fine. My wife's kayak was fine, but she ended up in the multiple portages that we had to do because the water was so low we couldn't float everything. Ended up getting grazed by a baby rattlesnake on her ankle. So that occurred. It was tough going. Sun was going down. So we were basically looking for a way out of the canyon, and both sides of the canyon was just lined with lava cliffs. We were probably about halfway down, maybe it's an 11-mile run, so maybe about 6-ish, 7 miles or so. So as we were walking and waiting, we came upon this sandbar. And it was in a pool, pretty large pool. Had a sandbar kind of in the middle, not quite in the middle, with a big rock. And then the sand formed around the rock. And as we were wading through the water and we're walking up to that, there were two big footprints in the sand. Probably about 18, 19 inches long, maybe a little bit longer. They were huge. Definitely 8-inch wide at the ball, 4 to 5 inches wide at the heel, and sunk about 4 inches into the gravel. And we're all standing there looking at this going, wow, this is just classic, everything you've ever seen, Bigfoot footprints in the middle of no freaking where. And we're looking at that. And I got up on this rock, which got me up about 3 feet above the gravel, and I jumped down and stomped my feet to try and make my footprint impression with my water shoes on. And I could barely leave a track maybe 1/4 of an inch in that gravel sandbar. These things were sunk a solid 4 inches, very crisp edges. So this, whatever this was, had just been there within the last hour or two. Within just a few hours. I mean, they were sharp edge, perfect prints with the little mound of sand in the middle, like when you step down and your foot rolls when you're walking on the beach, it leaves a little hump of sand in the middle. Well, there was that. We all knew what it was. We didn't have to talk about it. It was like, wow, yeah, holy cow. So anyway, make a long story short, we ended up spending the night. We found a way up the cliff, spent the night up the cliff, and managed to get ourselves home. So that was that encounter. That was the first time I actually saw tracks that I could say, whoa, what the heck was that? So later on, I had been working. I had gotten out of logging during that time and stuff, and did different things. And then I went back to logging in 2016. 16 or 15? 16 or 2016. Nah, it must have been 15. But this occurrence happened in 2016. I was camping about 2 miles west of Lake Almanor in California on a small creek called Butt Creek, of all names, north of Butt Lake. And I was literally 2 miles off to west of Highway, I think it's 89, that runs down the west side of Lake Almanor. I had my camper set up near a bridge, and I was camping down next to the river. And on a day in September 2016, I was asleep, and I heard sniffing next to the window. I had my bed, and my pillow was next to the window. I heard sniffing there, and I thought it was a bear because it was just loud huffing, inhaling, exhaling, sniffing, like something was really sniffing and smelling my window. And then my trailer rocked. It rocked about 3 times. So I thought maybe the bear stood up on his paws and rocked my trailer and was sniffing at my window. So I slapped the glass with the back of my hand and yelled, "Hey!" And it went silent. And this was probably about 1:30 in the morning. And I tried to go back to bed, and I thought, oh, you know what? I got my gas and my oil and my chainsaws in the back of my truck parked outside. And if it is a bear, they're known for just chewing up your gas cans and your oil jugs and stuff and making a mess out of everything. So I grabbed a flashlight, grabbed my 45, and I opened the door, and I shone my light around, and I didn't see anything. And I peeked out, and I looked around. Couldn't find anything, so I thought, he must have left. I went back to bed. I got up probably around 4 o'clock, loaded up, had to drive on the other side of the lake, about a half hour away, and up Dyer Mountain, because that's where we were falling timber and logging. And I got off around noonish, because it's summertime, and you go to work early as a timber faller, and you work your 6 hours, and you go home. But home for me was camp. So I got back to my trailer around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, roughly. And when I got back and pulled in, this is what I found. Let's see if you can see this. This is the heel. Here's the ball of the foot. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 toes. Now I took these pictures. There was about 60 feet of trackway around my trailer, up through the dust where I would drive in and out until it got up on the gravel of the logging road, and then the road was too packed with rock that it wasn't leaving any more tracks. I've never seen anything like this. And having 6 toes, I had to take its picture because it was really unusual. Here is another picture of it. And again, there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is a bad picture, so I'm going to go to the next one. Here it is down here. You can see how big this is. Now this footprint up here is my footprint. It's my size 10 barefoot. And you can see the heel here. That's the width of the heel there. That's the width of my heel. So my heel would be almost 2 inside of his heel. This is the width of the ball of my foot. The ball of this one's foot would be from there to there. Now, I don't know if Bigfoot has 6 toes, but whatever this was that shook my trailer at night had 6 toes. And yeah, it was pretty interesting. So there is those images for you. Back it up again to that other image. I don't know if I got another. Yeah. So you can see this super wide heel. There's the arch of the foot. It's very unusual, and it doesn't look anything like the tracks that we found in Battle Creek. And then the 6 toes you can see right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the big toe. Super wide heel. So that's what happened there. That was probably one of my most significant encounters with something I can't explain to you. My next unusual encounter was I was actually here at home in the valley, and I was painting out in the barn, and it was probably 10 o'clock at night. I was out there painting, and something, we have a drainage ditch on the west side of my barn, probably 50 feet away, that runs off the road and drains down into the creek. Well, I had the barn door open, had the floodlights on. I'm out there painting just inside the barn, and something just growled, and my hair went ding. I stood straight up. I stopped painting and I looked around, and it only growled once. It just this deep, not bone shaking, but deep animalistic growl. It wasn't a dog's growl. It wasn't any other growl I can describe of anything that we have around here. And it just growled. And we have mountain lions that frequent here every now and then, but it didn't feel like that. So I came in the house. I got my 45, strapped it on my hip, went back out, and started painting again, and figured, if it was a cat or something, I'd be armed. And then across the street from me, we have this hill with oak trees, and the turkeys sometimes roost up there. Probably about 10 minutes later, there was just this crashing and breaking of branches, and I heard a turkey squawk for a few squawks, and it sounded like something had fell out of the tree and stripped a whole bunch of oak branches down with it as it came down. Don't know what it was. I didn't find anything the next morning. Didn't see anything out of place. Didn't even find any broken branches that I could tell were fresh breaks. So about a couple weeks later, my wife was in the backyard doing some stuff, and we had the dogs out there. And she comes in the house, and she goes, "Something growled at me," or at her. And I go, "Really?" So we went out with the lights and shone around. We never found anything, found any tracks. So that was kind of unusual. I don't know what that was. Can't say this was a Sabe encounter or a Bigfoot encounter, but it was unusual. My next unusual event was I was logging up out of Butte Meadows, and this was just a few short years ago. I think it was 2019, or 2019, maybe 2020. Anyway, my fallen partner, and I won't say his name, we were booting up in the morning, getting ready to walk down in our strips, and we're sitting there tying our boots on, sitting on the tailgates of our trucks, and we had just been talking about an encounter that he had had when something in the brush just across the logging road from us, not more than 40 feet away, 50 feet away in the timber, in the small regrowth trees that you couldn't see in, gave a pretty heavy cough. And it could have been a buck deer, I don't know. But it was just ironic that we were just talking about his encounter and what he'd experienced. And then this thing, it just coughed once, and we both looked at each other, and our eyes got big. It's like, whoa, what was that? Yeah, it could have been a deer coughing. They have those coughs and snorts every now and then, but it was pretty darn loud. Probably louder than most of the deer I've ever heard snort or cough at me. So some people want to say, oh, it's a bear track. Well, I can tell you that's not a bear track. This is a bear track. These are bear tracks that I took off the Klamath River. And you can see the front paw and the hind paw, front paw, hind paw, and they overlap each other, which really somebody who's an untrained eye would think, oh, there's a foot and there's the toes. No, these are bear tracks. That's not a bear track. This is a bear track that I took on the Rogue River on one of the trips I took river camping. That's what most people would consider a pretty big bear. You can see it up against the palm of my hand here, or the back of my hand. This is the bear that tore up my camp over a 4th of July weekend, up off of just above Magalia. We were logging up there on a burn, and I was camped along a river. Well, actually, I was camped along just outside a landing next to a small creek. And I noticed this this bear. If you go back into my earlier videos on my YouTube channel that says that was one big bear, this is the bear. This track measures 5 inches across. That's a big front footprint for a black bear. You can see how deep it was sunk in the soil there. But that's a big bear, and it was a big bear. I saw her with her cub. It's a big bear. So anyway, this is not a bear track. Well, that's my story. Some people roll their eyes when I tell them parts of it, or this is the first time I've actually shared all of it in its entirety. I have shared it with Steve Ishdahl on the his YouTube channel on the facts, his how to hunt, the facts, and I've talked a little bit with David Politis, but I don't think he's ever read or anything or heard all of this. The only other weird experience that I had is we were living up out of Ingot off of 299 east of Reading, and one night we were getting ready. I think my wife and my daughter and they were making dinner, and it was dark, and I walked outside. I don't remember for what reason, and up the canyon behind the house was our water source, and I looked up there, and there was this glowing light. Looked like a spotlight, but it didn't have a beam. It was just bright. And it was moving slowly in and out of the timber. And as I watched it, it would rise up above the trees. And the trees were 60 to 80 foot tall trees up there. And then it would drift back down and zigzag in and out of the timber. And you could see the timber silhouetted against it as it went behind the timber. And it stayed in an area about a half acre. It never left that. And I watched this probably 10-15 minutes going, what the heck? So I went inside and I grabbed my daughter, who came out and watched it with me. And we couldn't figure out what it was. She to this day thinks it was St. Elmo's fire, but there was no weather conditions that would even indicate that that was even possible, as far as I'm concerned. And so she went back in the house. I probably watched this thing for an hour. Just this glowing light. It looked like maybe a 1,000,000 candle power spotlight, but there was no beam going in any direction. It was just a bright light. And it moved in and out of the timber, and occasionally it would rise up above the timber and drift around very slowly. And then it would drop back down in the timber almost to what it looked like ground level, or just above the ground, maybe 10 or 20 feet. And it would weave in and out of the trees, because you could see it passing in front of some trees and behind other trees, and it was just like it was searching for something. And then after about an hour or so, it just went ding, and it was gone. No sound, no motor, never heard any voices, never heard anything like that. So I have no idea what that was. The very last strange thing, actually there's two, At my camp where this occurred, where the bear ripped this bear here ripped my camp apart over a 4th of July weekend. I was gone for 3 days. I was sitting getting ready to make a phone call, and something in the creek down the hill mountain from me, not very far, maybe just a few 100 feet or so, started screaming, and it kept screaming. I have never heard anything like it before. But in my brain, for some reason, my brain told me, oh, that sounds like a civet cat or a marmot or something, which is kind of strange because I've never heard a marmot vocalize. I've never heard a fisher vocalize. My brain was saying maybe it's a fisher. I've never heard any of those animals vocalize, but it was weird, and it was loud, and it continued for 2 hours at least. I was waiting to get cell service to call my wife in the evening, and this thing went on, and for the weirdest thing, it never occurred to me to hit my phone and record that sound, which was really odd. The last weird thing that I had, and it's funny how your brain works, is I was camped up above Feather Falls. We were logging the burn up there. This was 2021. And I was camped up by what's known as Five Corners. I was about a mile up the road from Five Corners, parked on a lava precipice. And below me, about a mile or so below me, is a creek. And on the other side of the creek was a yarder company logging, and a buddy of mine was cutting that. But I was sitting there one evening with the windows open on my camper, and the breeze was blowing, and up from the canyon came this smell, and this is the only time I've ever smelled anything. It didn't stink. It didn't smell like rotting flesh or dog puke or dog crap or anything that you hear everybody describing what they smelled when they had a Bigfoot encounter. To me, it smelled a little musky and wet. Not like wet dog, but again, your brain works in weird ways. My brain said, must have been a bear that came across the creek, wading across the creek or something. Then again, I've never smelled a wet bear. So how would I know? I've never smelled a bear, period. I've run into a lot of bears. I've been within 30 feet of a bear standing up in front of me going, hey! And we eyeballed each other, and I finally just gave him the biggest gorilla growl and yell and scream that I could, and he took off running. Him and the other bear, there were two of them. So why my brain said must be a wet bear crossing the creek coming up the canyon, I don't know. Anyway, those are my encounters. Most of my family think I'm off the wall for even talking about it, but you know what, they weren't there. Half my friends go, yeah, pretty cool, and the other half think, yeah, okay, he's got a screw loose, but again, they weren't there. I don't go hunting for Bigfoot. I don't intend to go hunting for Bigfoot. And I never asked to have these experiences that happened to me. Have they kept me out of the woods? Hell no, I love being in the woods, and I often go up in the woods by myself. Does it make me afraid? No. So this is what I would like for those of you who have had unexplained experiences. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to share it. And matter of fact, if you want to share it on the comments below, or if you want to make a video like this one and download it to YouTube and attach it to the comments below, you are more than welcome to do that, because you're never going to see me criticize your story, because I wasn't there. I can't tell you whether it was true or not. The fact is, if any of you have had an experience, you're welcome to share it. You don't have to. I'm just sharing mine. before I'm so old that if I share this in the future, they're going to think I'm just some senile old man. Anyway, can't wait to get back in the woods myself. Logging season's a little delayed this year because of all the heavy snow we've had in California. But you know what? I'm looking forward to going back out there. I hope I don't run into a Bigfoot, but if I do, well, maybe he'll say howdy. All right, this is George Williams Sr. signing off. You guys be safe, take care. Don't ever be afraid of sharing what you've experienced, and don't ever let anybody tell you that you didn't experience what you did. Because if they weren't there, they have no skin in the game and have no right to tell you what you did or didn't see or experience. All right, y'all take care.